There we are. Hey everyone, Brian Rundle, Black and White with Brian Rundle and Lana Quest. Thank you guys so much for joining me. We have, if you don't know, I live in the state of Florida currently, and we have a hurricane on its way. It is literally should be hitting the state of, well, the bands and everything have hit the state of Florida already. Luckily, I live in north central Florida, so I'm going to get it. We're probably going to get 35 to 40-mile-per-hour winds, and that should be coming anytime now. So I'm hoping that my power stays on. I have been through hurricanes before in the past, and I've been fairly lucky that my power has not gone out for long periods of time. There was one hurricane where I've lost power for like 2 days. But other than that, I have been pretty lucky, and I hope to stay lucky through this one. But as I saw today, it is a category 4 right now. So, I'm hoping everybody that is in the panhandle in the state of Florida, um, that they are staying safe and they made proper accommodations to make sure that everybody in their household, all their pets, all their family is safe. And well, let's see how this thing plays out. It is going to do a lot of damage. There's absolutely no question about that. But but again, I hope everybody's safe, and let's see what happens, and hopefully I don't lose power here. So I want to begin the show tonight. Kamala Harris has been all over the place, and she is laying out her economic plan for everybody and for the American people. And there's been a big criticism of Kamala Harris that she hasn't been clear on her plans, and she's not doing interviews, and she's not doing any of this stuff. And well, she's been doing interviews lately. She has been laying out her economic plans, and she's been doing a very, very good job of doing that. She just recently spoke at the Economic Club of Pittsburgh, and she was discussing, again, her economic plans. She was discussing everything that she wants to do for the American people. And of course, this is an important subject because the economy is and should be the number one subject for everybody out there when they're voting. I mean, I take that back. It shouldn't be everybody's number one, but this is an actual subject that is important, and we should be listening to both candidates on what they plan on doing for the economy instead of allowing candidates and propaganda media to make you believe that the number one thing, and pretty much put everything else to the side, is going to be immigration. Because as I've said before on this show, I don't even have immigration in my top 10 as far as most important things that you should vote on. But the economy certainly should be in people's top 3 to 5. But Kamala Harris did speak, and this was what she had to say on what she wants to do for the American people, and not just for the right now, but for their future as well.
Save up for your child's education, to take a nice vacation from time to time. I want you to be able to buy Christmas presents for your loved ones without feeling anxious when you're looking at your bank statement. I want you to be able to build some wealth, not just for yourself, but also for your children and your grandchildren, intergenerational wealth.
Yeah, intergenerational wealth is important because, speaking for her as a Black woman, she and her people have been ripped off of that generational wealth because, as back in the days when, after the Great Depression, the Federal Housing Administration was formulated, and with that Federal Housing Administration being formulated, it helped a lot of people who were struggling at the time to be able to figure out how to buy a home and how to own a home. However, at that time, they did not allow it for people of color. And even as time had gone on and laws had come into place where they were allowing it for people of color, banks were discriminating a lot against people of color. There were real estate agents who were trying to steer Black people away from better communities. So if you understand this, and this is stuff that you can learn at some point in your life, you can understand why there is still some feeling that Black people were left behind in this country. And it's okay to admit that. It doesn't mean that now you have to give up everything in your life and give it to somebody of color. That's not what is being asked of. But what is important is that people understand history and people understand where people are coming from. So when you have a community that is left behind for a long time, they're not only left behind in buying homes and their generational wealth, they're being left behind from the educational standpoint, they're being left behind from a financial standpoint. And when you have less education and you have less money, then you may find yourself more in an area of crime. And when that happens, you automatically assume that all of the people in that community cause crime. So when that happens, police officers look at you differently, so they treat you differently. And this is what Black people have been saying for decades and decades and decades. And it's really not that hard to understand. It's really not hard to accept. It's actually pretty easy stuff if you look at it. And you could probably maybe formulate an opinion on how you view things, from that standpoint. But anyway, she continued on. Of course, she had to take some shots at Donald Trump, which she has done a phenomenal job of doing, because what she does is she takes these shots at Donald Trump and they're not constant and they're not like this is her whole campaign, but she throws these little darts at him that she knows is going to drive him crazy, but then she always focuses on her and what she's going to do and what she's going to do for the American people. And that's why her campaign has been incredible so far. This is why her campaign, in just a couple of short months, has been able to turn around what looked like a campaign on the Biden side left for dead. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. But it looked like his campaign was left for dead. And she came along, and there were questions. There were a lot of questions before she came along, because when you do these polls, and Lana and I discussed this last week or on Tuesday, we do these polls and you see Kamala Harris, the most unpopular vice president of all time. Well, I would gather to think and guess that most people, when they're asked that question, they don't even know why they're answering that she's unpopular. What are you saying about Kamala Harris that you're saying is so unpopular that you just don't like her? A lot of people don't really know her. And the fact that she's been able to turn around a 3.1 lead for Donald Trump when the day Joe Biden said he was out of the race, to now an over 2-point lead for her, and people still don't really know her, just tells you how effective her campaign is. But this is her taking a little shot at Donald Trump, talking about manufacturing jobs. Let's take a look and hear what she has to say.
Now look, my opponent, Donald Trump, well, he makes big promises on manufacturing. Just yesterday, he went out and promised to bring back manufacturing jobs. And if that sounds familiar, it should. In 2016, he went out and made that very same promise about the Carrier plant in Indianapolis. You'll remember, Carrier then offshored hundreds of jobs to Mexico under his watch. And it wasn't just there. On Trump's watch, offshoring went up and manufacturing jobs went down across our country and across our economy. All told, Almost 200,000 manufacturing jobs were lost during his presidency, starting before the pandemic hit, making Trump one of the biggest losers ever on manufacturing.
Yeah, there, if you notice, she puts an emphasis on losers because really, at the end of the day, as a businessman, as a human being, he really is a loser. I know a lot of people, I've said that many times before in the presence of other people, and they're like, how could you call a billionaire a loser? And I think a lot of people associate winners with money, but Donald Trump is a phony billionaire. He's not self-made in any way whatsoever. We've been over this 100 times. He has been left money by his daddy. He was handed basically a game show by Mark Burnett because he was a good marketer. He was a good sideshow clown sort of marketer and made people believe that he is the richest person in the world. And at no time was he the richest person in the world. Maybe there was a time he was in a list, and again, but it wasn't because he was so smart and so great at business that he accumulated all this wealth. He backed in and lucked into a lot of his money. And we talked about this on our show Tuesday night. I am reading a book called Lucky Loser about Donald Trump and his so-called business acumen and just how terrible it was. And if you, again, I've said this before, if you really do care about learning about Donald Trump, the businessman, I suggest you pick up that book. It's very, very good. But another quote here by Kamala Harris is, and this is another thing that people really need to start realizing. Democrats, liberals, however you want to classify them, they are for the capitalist system too. They are not for a communist system. They're not for a full-on socialist system. By the way, if you don't know, we already have a socialist system somewhat in this country. The American military is one of the biggest socialist programs in the world. And that's where most of our tax dollars, every time we are taxed on something or every time we have to pay taxes in any respect, most, or I shouldn't say most, a large portion of that money goes to the military. And of course, we're not going to complain about that. We want our military to be as strong as possible. There is an argument to be made that maybe we spend way too much money on our military, considering that the other 12 countries that spend money on their military, I think it's 11 out of 12, are our allies. So we basically have a military, the most powerful military just by ourselves. And then when you add our allies behind it, again, in any war, the United States will never be beaten. They just will never be beaten. And again, we don't want war. And I'm not saying that if a war happens, then nothing happens to America. Of course, there is things that can happen. And that's why we spend a lot of money on our military. But back to the point, the military is the biggest socialist program basically in the country. But here's Kamala Harris explaining to the people that she also is a capitalist, but she'll explain some other things on top of that.
I also believe we need to engage those who create most of the jobs in America. Look, I'm a capitalist. I believe in free and fair markets. I believe in consistent and transparent rules of the road to create a stable business environment. And I know the power of American innovation. I've been working with entrepreneurs and business owners my whole career. And I believe companies need to play by the rules, respect the rights of workers and unions, and abide by fair competition. And if they don't, I will hold them accountable. And if anyone has a question about that, just look at my record as Attorney General. Look at my record in California, taking on the big banks for predatory lending, taking on big healthcare companies for conspiring to jack up prices, taking on a big for-profit college for scamming veterans and students. At the same time, I believe that most companies are working hard to do the right thing by their customers and the employees who depend on them. And we must work with them to grow our economy. I believe an active partnership between government and the private sector is one of the most effective ways to fully unlock economic opportunity. And that is what I will do when I am president.
It's refreshing to hear somebody running for president that is clear, concise, doesn't go off on bizarre tangents like her opponent does. She's exactly right. And what I like about that clip, and like what I like about what she said, is she is calling out the ones who are doing wrong, but she also acknowledges that not all of them are doing wrong. You know, we can't just sit here and say, I'm a finger pointer and we're coming after all of you. She's right. And this is her experience as a prosecutor, is that what she's doing is she's setting up, and she says, I'm going after the ones who are doing wrong and not the ones who are doing right. And the right-wing propaganda billion-dollar media can do all they want to, and it's working in some extent, but they're doing everything they can to shape her as somebody who's a communist who, again, if you ask most people what is a communist, nobody really would be able to answer that question properly. There really hasn't ever been a true communist country. If you look at the definition of communism, nobody's really ever done communism the way the definition is of the word. But you know, we throw words out there, and then we irresponsibly go out there and regurgitate these ridiculous claims. And even more irresponsibly, we go and vote on those ridiculous claims. But I want to point out one other thing too, because what she's saying, she's talking about these companies and these businesses that are going out and they are not doing right by the American people. And she's talking about the companies that have been doing this. This is not a new thing. This is something that has been going on for over decades. And I want to share something here real quick. This comes from the Economic Policy Institute, and they did a study on the difference between the amount of money that CEOs make versus their workers. And I want to go over a few of the key findings here. The growth of CEO compensation between 1978 and 2021, using the realized compensation measure, compensation of the top CEOs increased 1,460.2% from 1978 to 2021, adjusting for inflation. Top CEO compensation grew roughly 37% faster than the stock market growth during this period, and far eclipsed the slow 18.1% growth in a typical worker's annual compensation. CEO granted compensation rose 1,050.2% from 1978 to 2021. It goes on, growth of CEO compensation during the pandemic. So this is between 2019 and 2021, and this is important to note as well. The dramatic increase in CEO compensation during the pandemic is remarkable. While millions lost jobs in the first year of the pandemic and suffered real wage declines due to inflation, in the second year, CEOs realized compensation jumped 30.3% between 2019 and 2021. Typical worker compensation among those who remained employed rose 3.9% over that same span. So, this is what she's talking about. We're talking about the price gouging. So, if you really truly want to understand why inflation got high, and it got as high as 9.1%, and food prices still are a little bit higher than they should be, this is exactly the kind of investigation you should be doing. This isn't something that you should be just taking for granted or listening to somebody else say something or listening to a propaganda media that is fueled by billions of dollars to fool you and to sucker you into thinking that the people who are making all the money aren't doing this to you, that it's Joe Biden and Kamala Harris doing this to you. But if I pose the question, exactly what did Joe Biden and Kamala Harris do to make prices of food go up? Nobody can answer that question, but it says it here quite plainly that these CEOs are making money during the pandemic. And how are they doing that? They're jacking up the prices of their food and they're saying, we have to do this because there's a pandemic, we have supply chain issues. And if we don't jack up our prices, then we're going to lose a lot of revenue. And in some respects, you understand that if that was true throughout 2019 and 2021, but it wasn't true throughout that entire time. In fact, what they did is they jacked up their prices during COVID under the guise that we have supply chain issues and we need to do this in order to not lose revenue and to at least stay steady or not lose more revenue than we thought we were going to lose. So if some of that is true, fine, no problem. But what happened is they jacked up their prices, and then when everything smoothed out, there was no more supply chain issues that would hold up their goods coming in to resell. They continued to keep their prices high and never lowered them. That is a reason and a big reason why inflation stayed high. So to continue to blame somebody because you just have been fooled into believing that this is a person or one person's particular um, uh, plans or their president, so they're responsible for the high prices of food. But the same people, when Kamala Harris says, I'm going to stop price gouging, the same people are going, you can't do that. You can't control the prices of food for companies. You're talking out of both sides of your mouth and you're not really understanding what you're saying. And that's what really drives me insane. But I want to go over a couple of few other things here. The implications of growth of CEO to top 0.1% of compensation ratio. The fact that CEO compensation has grown far faster than the pay of the top 0.01 of wage earners indicates that CEO compensation growth does not simply reflect a competitive race for skills, the market for talent that also increases the value of highly paid professionals more generally. So basically what that is saying is, I relate to this a little bit because I was in the auto industry. I was in the car business for quite some time. And back in the old days, the car business was filled with, the car business has never had a good reputation at all. They just haven't. And there's reasons for that because they were ripoff artists. And you go in and buy a car, you don't really know what's in the car. Especially back then when you didn't have internet, you didn't have all that stuff. But the car business still had, the older guys who had families and they were there to earn a real wage so they can build a middle class or even a higher than middle class family and earn wages. And that was their job. But the car business now, if you look into it, if you ever go buy a car right now, what you're going to see is you're going to see a 19 to 24-year-old kid who has absolutely no idea what they're doing. And basically, what they're doing with these kids is they're paying them as little as possible, and they are sending them out on test drives. And the management, who gets paid more money, are the ones who come in and close the deals. So, they're renting basically salespeople, because you could go into a car dealership right now, go into it 6 months from now, it's a whole new staff. You might see some management that is the same. There's a good chance that that management won't be there either. But what they do with these sales kids, is what I call them now, is they throw them out there. They cross their fingers that hopefully one or two of them take their job seriously and turn out to be a good salesperson, so the management team doesn't have to close every single deal. But that's basically what it comes down to. And it gets really frustrating for customers, because you go in there to buy this car, you're dealing with a kid who has absolutely no idea how to negotiate. They don't know any idea of what the buyer is even trying to tell them. And they go and try to relay this to somebody at the desk who is the manager, and the manager yells at the salesperson for being an idiot. The salesperson's going back scared to death, really not knowing how to present these numbers back to them. And then maybe 30 minutes to an hour later, you'll get somebody who knows more about the price of the car and will negotiate. And by then you're frustrated and you're either like, I got to get out of here, or hell, let's just buy the car. So that has been my experience, but it's also too a reality. Call any customer service right now, especially with major corporations. Try to call a customer service number and get in touch with somebody in a reasonable amount of time. I swear, 2 weeks ago, I had to call Bank of America about something on my account. It literally took 45 minutes for somebody to finally answer the phone. It was incredibly annoying. And then when they answered the phone, I was transferred twice and people still couldn't answer the question. And again, this is what these corporations do. They know they have to have some sort of customer service, but they pay very little. So the people who are going to take those jobs are just happy to have a job. And they're scared to death half the time answering the phone calls, because they don't know what to say other than they're reading off a script. Or you ask them a question, and what do? They type into a computer. You can even hear them type. And they're typing in your question to see if some sort of AI answer will come up so they can answer your question. And it is incredibly annoying. But again, this is how these CEOs are making more and more money. They're cutting more and more people's pay, and they're getting less and less talent so they can put more money in their pockets. And they're kind of like, damn customer service, who gives a shit? Or, I don't really care if this kid is a good salesperson. Doesn't really matter. We're just going to throw that kid out there. We're going to pay the management a pretty decent amount of money, and everybody else we're going to pay as little as possible. So that way the owners and the top 1% of these companies get more money in their pockets. And that's just not the car business. That's just not major corporations when it comes to your customer service. This is all corporations. And the ruse was, during the Reagan administration, is that these people, really what they wanted to do was cut taxes for us, so we could take the money that we're saving, and we're going to pay you guys more money. And that was the ruse. And you could see clearly that that just is not the case. Ever since they announced this idea of the Reagan tax cuts, so we could do the trickle down economics and pass it down to our workers. Some companies did that, but a majority of companies did not do that. And what happened? the wage gap between the owners and the workers became more and more and more and more. During the 60s, it was probably about a 20 to 1 owner to to the employer or to the employee. Now it's about 400 to 1. I mean, that is insane. And this is what Democrats are really nailing down on. They're basically saying, okay, enough tax breaks for you. And in fact, we're going to raise some taxes on you so we could do more things for the American people overall. It drives me nuts when I hear people talk about Ukraine. We're giving money to Ukraine. Why don't we do stuff for the American people? But then when I tell you, oh, Kamala Harris wants to do this for the American people and she wants to use tax dollars by taxing corporations to do it. No, you can't do that. That's communism. It's really started to get irritating that people are not just looking at, forget about the big picture. They're not even looking at the middle picture or the small picture. They're just looking at a picture that they're being fed and they're being told. Now, you could look at me and go, aren't you being fed? Where are you getting your information from? Where are you reading your news? Well, one, I go to websites and I read facts like that. I don't watch cable news. I don't do any of that stuff. I look at something, and even if I do listen to a podcast or two that is on the same side that I am, I will listen. And if something sounds too good to be true, or if it does sound really good, I will investigate it to make sure that it is true and to make sure that it's right. But a lot of people don't want to investigate anything. They just want to hear, regurgitate. Half the time, what they regurgitate is wrong anyway. But even if they regurgitate it exactly verbatim of what they heard, that's wrong too. So either way, you're wrong. But that gets really super frustrating. Angel, hey, thank you for joining us. Alaska food and gas prices has yet to go down. Yeah, nationally, the gas prices are down, and a lot of people just don't understand. I had somebody in my comments the other day say that he's voting for Donald Trump because we're going to be energy independent again. And again, it's hard to explain to somebody like that guy that we are more energy independent based on the definition that Trump used and everybody else wants to use that term for. We are more energy independent than we have ever been in the history of this country. We are drilling. There is no drilling that has been stopped in this country. We are producing more oil than we ever have in the history of this country. I earlier said if I heard something on a podcast, I'm just not going to take it verbatim and then spread that news. I would go look that up. Do me a favor. If you're listening to this podcast and you refuse to believe it, you don't want to believe it, just simply go to Google and say, do we produce more oil than we ever have in the history of this country? Or it's anywhere in that respect, and you're going to find that we have, and that's just the case. But more interviews for Kamala Harris. She was on MSNBC with Stephanie Rule lately. She did a great job. Another great job where people think that she's afraid to sit down for an interview because she has no answers. That's really not the case. What Kamala Harris needed to do is she was just thrown into this race by her president saying that I am stepping down from this race and I would like to nominate you. He called her, told her his plan, and said, I want to suggest you as the nominee. Just so everybody knows out there, that doesn't mean she automatically won. He suggested it. The Democrats all got together and said, should we run somebody else against her? Maybe there's one or two of them that said we should, but at the end of the day, they all came together and said, no, we feel comfortable with her. And they moved forward with her. And at this point, it appears as if it has been a great decision. But the reason why she didn't instantly go out and do interviews is because she had to prepare a plan. She had to sit down. She's not like Donald Trump, who just whims off the top of his head and says a bunch of bullshit that's never going to come true. She really legitimately wants to put together a plan. She wants to put together her agenda, and then I'll go out and start doing more interviews, and then I'll go out and start telling people what my plan is. Keep in mind, this was only just a couple short months ago that she was thrown into this race. So from what has happened from that time to now has been nothing short of remarkable. But this is her with Stephanie Rule. And her first question was, and it's a good question, if you ask people about the economy right now, most people had said in these polls that Donald Trump was better for the economy than Kamala Harris. And Stephanie Rule is curious about that and asked Kamala Harris about that particular question as to why that is. And this was her answer.
Years, there have been tremendous economic wins. And you've just laid out a big plan. But still, polling shows that
real quick, and that's the most frustrating thing, is what she said at first, is that there have been a ton of economic wins. And if you really do listen to economists, if you do really care about what's happening in this country with the economy, outside that you pay more for eggs and milk, and I'm not discounting that, by the way, because I'm paying more for food. And I explained that earlier as to why we are paying more for food and milk and things of that nature. But economically, in this country right now, we are doing incredibly well. The stock market and S&P today, which isn't necessarily an overall picture of the economy. I understand that. Hopefully you understand that. But if you look at your 401ks, if you look at anything that you have investments in, they are doing better now than they ever have in the history of this country, because the S&P and the stock market again closed for the stock market closed for, I think, a 32nd straight record high, and the S&P was over 40 straight, or not straight, but 40-time record high of the S&P. And this is all done during, most of it is done during the Biden-Harris administration. So it is frustrating that a lot of people don't understand how well the economy is doing, because they conflate it with the inflation. But the economy is doing incredibly well. Again, Google it. Just say, is the economy doing well in the United States of America? And get your answer.
Most likely voters still think Donald Trump is better to handle the economy. Why do you think that is?
Well, here's what I know in terms of the facts. Donald Trump left us with the worst economy since the Great Depression, when you look at, for example, the employment numbers.
It was during COVID, and employment was so high because we shut down the government, we shut down the country.
Now, that's actually, Stephanie Rule did a great job there, because she is exactly right. But Kamala Harris's answer is going to be, right as well. But it is important to note that a lot of the things that happened under the Trump administration, where the economic numbers tumbled, like the job losses, the stock market, all that stuff, it's important to note that COVID did hit. But what drives me insane is that if we're going to acknowledge that the economy took a major hit because of COVID, then you have to acknowledge that the economy continued that way because of COVID. COVID didn't just stop because Donald Trump was out of office and Joe Biden took over. If you look at all the economic numbers, everything bad that Joe Biden had taken over had turned around completely, and now everything is way, way, way better economically. But let's let her finish her answer.
For the pandemic, he lost manufacturing jobs by most people's estimates, at least 200,000. He lost manufacturing plants. Ask the auto workers how he lost auto plants. We have grown over 20 new auto plants. He has an agenda. Let's just deal with it right now going forward, not to mention what happened in the past. He has an agenda that would include making it more difficult for workers to earn overtime, an agenda that would include cutting off access to small business loans for small businesses, an agenda that includes tariffs to the point that the average working person will spend 20% more on everyday necessities and an estimated $4,000 more a year on those everyday necessities, to the point that top economists in our country, from Nobel laureates to people at Moody's and Goldman Sachs, have compared my plan with his and said my plan would grow the economy, his would shrink the economy. Some of them have actually assessed that his plan would increase inflation and invite a recession by the middle of next year. So the facts remain that Donald Trump has a history of taking care of very rich people. And I'm not mad at anybody for being rich, but they should pay their fair share. But tax cuts for the billionaires and the top corporations in our country, and then not really paying much attention to middle-class families. My perspective on the economy is when you grow the middle class, America's economy is stronger. And there's empirical evidence to prove my point correct.
I want to ask anybody when they're polled that they feel that Donald Trump is better for the economy than Kamala Harris would be. Explain to me why, unless you don't know this information, but if you do know this information, explain to me why you would take the word over a guy who has filed for bankruptcy and has pretty much ruined every business he has ever put his hands on. Maybe you don't know this. Maybe you don't know how awful he was as a business person. But why would you put more trust in him over economists who say clearly that Kamala Harris's economic plan would be better for the economy? And not only that, that Donald Trump's economic plan, the way he has it laid out, and the very few things that he has said that he wants to do for the economy and his economic plan, which is to place a full board tariff on every good that comes into this country from other countries. Even Mitch McConnell the other day said that that is a terrible thing. Every economist says all that's going to do is raise taxes and raise prices on the American people, and it is going to send us into a recession by next year. This is what economists say. So on what planet is Donald Trump a better person for the economy? Actually, on what planet is Donald Trump better than Kamala Harris or anybody else pretty much you want to name better as a president than Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, Barack Obama, Mitt Romney? I don't care who you want to throw out there, unless you're going to throw out like Marjorie Taylor Greene or somebody like that. But I'm talking about somebody seriously, explain it to me. I'm happy to. I say this all the time. I almost say it every week on the show. If you're watching this and it's counter to what I'm saying, please explain to me. Say it in the comments. You can email me at runshousepodcast.com, runshousepodcast@gmail.com. You can explain it to me. Just explain it to me, and I promise you I will investigate it. And if I investigate it and find that you're right, I will come on the show and I will read verbatim what you sent to me so I can straighten out exactly what I am trying to tell people, what Kamala Harris is trying to tell people. But there's been a phenomenal conduit and to the campaign for Kamala Harris, and that has been Mark Cuban. He has been all over the place. Now, Mark Cuban is a real billionaire. He is a self-made billionaire. This guy actually understands money. He understands the economy. He initially was a Donald Trump supporter. When Donald Trump first came around, he looked at him and goes, hey, you know what? Maybe we take the politicians, the lifelong politicians out of this, and maybe he's somebody that can do something different for this country. And he had explained that where he quickly changed his mind is that he would listen to Donald Trump. And that really should do it for most people with at least a junior high school education, is just listen to this guy and understand he has absolutely no idea what he's talking about. And Mark Cuban has said, yeah, I mean, I listened to him, and he really didn't have any explanation on how he was going to do things. He would just say things randomly, but there was no explanation. There was no plan, and he had absolutely no interest in an explanation or a plan. He just liked saying things. But this is him on with Jake Tapper on CNN, and he is talking about Donald Trump, first of all, as being the true socialist, and that Kamala Harris and her price gouging plan is not socialism at all. In fact, it's quite the opposite, and explains this out a little bit better.
Campaign call, you compared policy proposals made by Trump to those from independent Senator Bernie Sanders, who's a socialist. What do you mean?
Well, it was a race for socialism, right? Bernie said that credit card companies should cap their rates, their interest rates, at 15%. Donald Trump, being the socialist that he is, had to beat Bernie. So Donald Trump went out and recommended that interest rate caps be set to 10%. I mean, the fact that he's even suggesting price controls and price caps is socialism 101. You haven't heard that from the vice president. You have heard that from Donald Trump.
Well,
then
how do you interpret?
How
do you interpret what she's doing in terms of price gouging, taking on price gouging by food companies? Because a lot of critics have said that that is a form of price controls.
I hope Jake Tapper asked him that question as a setup for the answer that Mark Cuban's about to give, because I'm hoping that Jake Tapper is not conflating the two. But let's listen to Mark Cuban's answer. Uh-oh. Mark? Hold on. I am hearing, by the way, the heavier rain and the winds are coming in from this hurricane. So I don't know if this at all has anything to do. It says that I still have internet access. So let's see. Let me remove this, and let's see if I can add this back in. Let's see if it works, because my clips might be done here. This hurricane's coming. Let me see if this one plays.
No, there is a reason.
Okay, so maybe I'm gonna try this one more time. Sorry, guys, because I really would like for you to hear his answer. All right, so that one for some reason is no longer on there. But basically, what he was saying was what I was saying earlier about the price gouging, is that Kamala Harris is holding companies responsible during times of pandemics or a hurricane that is coming our way. If something is happening, we are not going to allow these companies just to jack up their prices and say we need to do it because of emergency purposes. These companies that raised their prices during that time were bragging about their profits. You should never be able to make record profits during emergency times in this country. Does anybody listening to me when I say that, does anybody disagree? If you disagree with that, I would love to hear why you disagree that companies should still be able to jack up prices even in the detriment of people like you and me and everybody else watching this podcast, or anybody else that has that particular question. Explain to me why that is okay. And again, I'll look at it and see if it makes sense. And if it makes sense, I will repeat that on the next show. But Mark Cuban's done a great job for Kamala Harris, and you can see how passionate he is. And, this is not a one-off. There are tons of people who were either a Trump supporter at one point, or they were lifelong Republicans. And more of them are coming out and speaking out, not just against Donald Trump, but they are saying, I am voting for Kamala Harris because, A, she's got a plan. She has the best interest of the American people. Will everything that she's saying come to fruition, and will everything come true? Let's cross our fingers and hope it does. There's a possibility it won't, because presidents can't get every single thing done. There are a lot of people in this country who believe that you're president and you just go in there and say, do this, do this, do this. And when it's all over, you go, well, they never did that. Well, there's processes to being able to do this, and do this. And sometimes you get them through, sometimes you don't. Joe Biden did a phenomenal job getting a lot of his agenda through that a lot of people said that there's no way he'd be able to do it. He did an unbelievable job. And that's why I have said on numerous occasions, and I'm going to praise him by the end of the show again, but, on numerous occasions, why he is one of the most consequential and most successful presidents that we've ever had in the history of this country. But on the opposite side, the dumbest person that has ever run for office in the history of this country is Donald Trump. And he is running again for a third time. He was beaten 2 times in the popular vote. He was beaten in the popular vote and the Electoral College in 2020, as we all know. And I foresee him getting beat again in the 2024 election. It might be worse than it was with Joe Biden. Every time I see a poll, we see polls all the time, and it gets worrisome at sometimes. And then the other time you're like, okay, this is a cakewalk. And then it's back to being tied, and it's all over the place. But if you just listen, and this is a lot like 2016, and this is why the Trump people thought that they were going to win, is because there was a groundswell of people that people weren't paying attention to. There was a buzz that people weren't paying attention to. Hillary Clinton was so strong, and she was such a heavy favorite, and she was winning in all these polls, that it was, for most people, a no-brainer that race and that election probably would have been called by 9:00 at night that night. But obviously it wasn't. It wasn't called until like 2 or 3 a.m. when they announced Donald Trump the winner in 2016, and people were shocked. And they weren't paying attention to that groundswell. They weren't paying attention to the feelings of what's going on. And I feel like that's what you're seeing now, but at least on the Kamala Harris side, not on the Donald Trump side. I think Donald Trump is losing more voters. He's not gaining voters. And any voters that he's gaining, he's losing a lot more than he's gaining. So I'm not even sure the ones that he's gaining are necessarily going to be the ones who are going to go out and vote, because the ones that he's really trying to get now are the people who listen to the like bro podcaster kind of guys like Theo Vaughn and Lex Friedman and other guys like this. Those are the guys that they are targeting, the guys who would never really go even bother registering voting. They love talking about politics, and they love going around and regurgitating nonsense that they hear and read on memes, but they don't really, maybe I'll vote, maybe I won't. And they may pick up some of those, but you're still going to have the attitudes of those guys that are wanting to be part of the conversation, not knowing what they're talking about, and at the end of the day, still probably won't vote. But bottom line is, I feel like we're going to see a huge victory for Kamala Harris. I don't call anything in the bag, but I feel really good about this. I really do. But Donald Trump has been out recently, and I told you we're coming down to the last, we have less than 6 weeks until the election. And what we're hoping at this point is that every Donald Trump clip I play after the election is going to be either him whining about him losing. It's going to, for a brief time, be clips of him convincing his flying monkeys that they need to go out and fight for him because he was cheated out of election that he wasn't cheated out of. And finally, the clips of him doing his goofy press conferences after every single court hearing that he's going to have to be in while he is running around at court case to court case. Now, he actually may even be in jail because there is a sentencing coming after the election. And in that sentencing, after he loses this election, and he continues to run his mouth about losing the election unfairly, I think you may have a judge as like, yeah, I think I'm done with this guy too. Throw his ass in jail because he was convicted of a crime in New York. And you talk about a two-tier justice system. The fact that this guy's just walking still around the streets, even though he was convicted, not only is he walking around the streets, he's able to run for the highest office in the world. And it really makes no sense. But speaking of making no sense, this is Donald Trump talking about the current or the recent rate cuts that happened, which, again, if you listen to Donald Trump, you're going to find out this is a guy who just doesn't understand how things work.
There is a reason for the interest rate cut from the Fed. Big part of that reason is that our economy is doing really, really badly.
So, yeah, that's not the reason why the Federal Reserve cut the rates. The reason why the Federal Reserve cut the rates is because the economy is doing very, very well. Now, normally, the reason why you cut rates, or one of the reasons why you would cut rates, is because the economy is doing badly. And that's why they did it initially back when Donald Trump was president. When COVID hit, the economy was doing terribly. And in order to stimulate the economy, the Federal Reserve cut the interest rates down to zero. And that's why you saw home prices, I'm sorry, not home, well, you saw interest rates go down to record lows. That wasn't because of something Donald Trump conjured up and he's so smart and got our interest rates down. The Federal Reserve cut the rates because the economy was doing badly. And Donald Trump is trying to make you think that this is the same thing, that they're cutting rates because the economy is bad. So either he doesn't understand it, or he thinks you're stupid that you don't understand it, or you are stupid and you don't understand it. Now, when I say stupid, I don't mean stupid in everything. You might be smart in other areas. But in that particular instance, if you think that the interest rates were cut because the economy is doing badly, then you are economically stupid. And that's okay. I'm stupid in some areas, and I'm willing to admit that. So I hope you're willing to admit the same. But speaking of stupid, he is in the same press conference. This is another thing that he is convinced a certain amount of people in this country that is bad, and that is that we're giving money to Ukraine to help fight the war against Vladimir Putin and Russia. Now, growing up, and even way before I was born, I had people who can attest to this, my dad and his dad and everybody else that was born before me. Russia was not our pal. Russia was not a country that we ever bowed down to, that we defended in any way. Russia has, for the most part, and for all intents and purposes, has been our enemy. Now, there have been times in our country's history where there has been less strife than others with Russia. But right now, our relationship with Russia is not great. And there are a lot of old school, and actually, there are a lot of Republicans in office right now who understand how important it is that Vladimir Putin does not win this war against Ukraine. That is not good for America. But Donald Trump, who sucks up to Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un and other authoritarian leaders, is complaining about the money that the United States is giving Ukraine, but he starts off talking about Ukraine and somehow ends up with Elon Musk. I mean, who listens to this guy and goes, yeah, I got to vote for him. This sounds really smart.
The war in Ukraine, oh, what a problem, what a horrible. This is a war that would have never happened. October 7th in Israel would have never happened. But I will end the chaos in the Middle East quickly. And I'm the only one that's going to do this. We have never been so close to World War III as we are right now. We are so close.
Not true.
I will be sure that World War III will not happen. I'm the only one can say it won't happen. But you're very close. And that'll be a war like no other, because I always say it's not going to be two tanks, which, by the way, our country wants to convert to electric. I'm not going to
Okay, here we go. Here's where he makes some sort of bizarre...
Would have never happened.
Oh, shoot.
But you're very close, and that'll be a war like no other, because I always say it's not going to be two tanks, which, by the way, our country wants to convert to electric. I'm not going to let that happen. They want electric tanks. They don't work well. The battery size is so big, you're going to have to pull a trailer behind the tank. No, can you believe this? They want electric tanks. They don't care. They want to have a nice, free, beautiful for the environment as we blast our way through countries. These people are crazy. They're crazy. You know, they want electric trucks, even though a diesel-fueled truck can go from New York to Los Angeles with plenty of fuel left over.
I am willing to bet anybody who owns a diesel truck. I'll bet anything you want. Anything. It doesn't even matter. Maybe just for bragging rights, for $1 billion. I don't have $1 billion, but I won't need it. I will bet you $1 billion, $100, whatever it is you want to bet, that nobody with a diesel truck can drive from New York to Los Angeles and have plenty of gas left over. How does anybody listen to this idiot, this clown? And they're in the background cheering. Maybe I shouldn't pause.
Electric truck, which weighs 2.5 times as much because the battery is so heavy, which takes about half of the payload, in addition to the battery itself, takes half of the payload. It has to stop approximately 6 to 7 times. In the Midwest, you just saw Biden, they built battery chargers, 8 of them. They spent $9 billion on 8 chargers. It's not going to work. And I'm all for electric. And I like Elon Musk. Elon gave me a tremendous endorsement, a very heartfelt endorsement. He feels that if I'm not elected, this country is...
Yeah, okay. So we went from the war in Ukraine to electric batteries to Elon Musk. This guy rambles on. He has zero. Again, this is one of these things. He has no plan for the American people. Literally none. He doesn't talk about his plans. In fact, he was just recently on some news show, and he was asked about contraception and what was his plan and what was his thought on it. This is his typical ridiculous answer that he gives every time, and nobody holds him accountable for it.
Related to this is the whole issue of contraceptives. Do you support any restrictions on a person's right to contraception?
Well, we're looking at that, and I'm going to have a policy on that very shortly. And I think it's something that you'll find interesting. And it's another issue that's very interesting. But you will find it, I think, very smart. I think it's a smart decision. But we'll be releasing it very soon.
The guy who
related to this,
the guy who sells Bibles, sneakers, watches, NFT cards. This is the guy who continues to say, I have a plan that's coming out. It'll be out in 2 weeks. You'll see it. You're going to love it. It's going to be very interesting. He has absolutely no idea. What I'm willing to bet, he probably doesn't even know what contraceptives are. I bet you he doesn't even understand what that word was. And he's trying to answer a question. He's like, you're going to see the plan. It's coming out and it's very interesting. I think you're going to love it. You're going to think it's very awesome. And you're going to think it's great. What? Again, this is I've said this before, and I'm going to play a clip here in a minute because I'm done having these conversations with these Trump people who think they're going to come at me. And I'm talking about just me personally because I have these conversations with people. So I'm not trying to make this about me, but I'm just talking about me personally because I have these conversations with people that Kamala Harris doesn't even understand what she's talking about, or Kamala Harris doesn't do interviews, or Kamala Harris doesn't tell us what her policies are. Well, I just played a bunch of clips that she does lay out what her policies are. And when she does do it, she does it in a coherent manner that whether you like them or not, you at least understand them. But I'm not having these conversations with these Trump people anymore, where they think they're going to ask me these questions when that's the guy that you're voting for who answers nothing. And even when he does answer them, they're so incoherent that how are you voting for him? What is it that he's saying that you're saying, yeah, I understand. I completely am taking in what Donald Trump is saying. Everything he says makes sense. You know, he is going to come out with this plan about contraceptives and it's going to be great. Well, what is it? I don't know, but he says it's going to be awesome. But Kamala Harris isn't answering questions. But I want to play this clip because Nancy Pelosi was on with Jake Tapper the other day. And I don't know what's happening with Jake Tapper. It's not Jake Tapper's job to be a conduit to the Democratic Party. But, he's asking these questions and playing this both sides thing. And he did it with Nancy Pelosi. And Nancy Pelosi, this is exactly what I'm talking about. I'm shutting down these ridiculous questions. I'm not even engaging them anymore. If you're going to sit here and try to think you're going to hit me with your why doesn't she, when your guy does absolutely nothing, it ain't happening with me. But this is Nancy Pelosi doing a good job of shutting down Jake Tapper's question.
I'm saying that Kamala Harris has bigger cognitive problems than Joe Biden.
Why would you even cover that? This is a person who's not on the level. He is their nominee for president. He is incompetent. Let's not even talk about the silliness of it all and the weirdness of it all and the assault on women that it is. We're not going to talk issues.
That's exactly how everybody, if you're in a conversation with a Trump supporter, unless they say something coherent or they ask you a question that is relevant, then that's how you should engage with every single one. Why would you even ask me that question? We're dealing with a guy who's running for president, who is a felon. He was convicted for sexual assault. He started an insurrection against this country. He has no answers for anything. And then when he does, they're so incoherent. None of them make sense. He brings up sharks and batteries and windmills and fictional characters, Hannibal Lecter, that is a good friend of his, and all this ridiculousness. So on what planet do you think we're going to sit here and have a both sides conversation? I'm not doing that anymore with anybody. I'm sorry. I know it sounds, no, unless you come to me and you ask me a legitimate question, or if you want to have a serious conversation, we could do that. But if your question is, how come Kamala Harris doesn't answer questions? First of all, she does. She answers plenty of questions. And as I said, she answers them coherently. But, explain to me what Donald Trump, how is he answering questions? And when he does answer questions, explain to me his answers, because I don't understand any of them. But a couple more things. Right now, we are in a political landscape that is so insanely crazy because of this Donald Trump character that we are now listening to news, and professional journalists and broadcasters have to investigate whether or not cats and dogs are being eaten by Haitians that live in Springfield, Ohio, because Donald Trump and JD Vance are passing along this fake story that it is happening. Just a quick review. There are a lot of Haitian migrants that migrated to Springfield, Ohio. And the reason why they migrated to Springfield, Ohio is because there were job openings for them when they got there from the citizens of Springfield, Ohio. These Haitian migrants are also here legally. They are not here illegally. There was a woman who posted something that her pet was missing and that she believes one of the Haitians ate her pets. She called 911 over it. And then it turned out her pet, I believe the pet's name was Sassy. The cat's name was Sassy. The pet came home a day later or 2 days later, and her cat had never been eaten. And this woman subsequently went on and said she feels horrible for spreading that rumor. She feels terrible. She wished she would have never said it. And now it is not only a national story, but this is something that had been spread by the potential vice president and president of the United States of America. So because we have this outrageous, ridiculous now in this country, we have these clowns like this gentleman named Clay Higgins, who is in Congress and wrote this tweet the other day about the Haitian migrants. LOL. First of all, again, LOL is something that a lot of people use, but this is a person. His name is Clay Higgins, but if you see in his name is Representative Clay Higgins, which means he is a representative of people and constituents in Congress in the United States of America, and he is opening up his tweet on a government under his government name here with LOL. These Haitians are wild, eating pets, voodoo, nastiest country in the Western Hemisphere, cults, slapstick gangsters. But damned if they don't feel all sophisticated now, filing charges against our president and VP, which, by the way, is referring to there are Haitians that filed criminal charges against them, which they absolutely should have. All these thugs better get their mind right and their asses out of our country before January 20th. Now, I don't know, man. If you're looking at that and you think that that's hilarious and you think that's funny, then I don't know if you're probably somebody that should be voting. I really don't. I don't think that you're taking this country seriously. I don't think you're taking yourself seriously. You're probably not taking your whole life seriously, because there is nobody with a brain. There is nobody with sympathy and empathy, especially over something that is completely made up and not true, that you're going to continue with that narrative and you're going to cheer on Clay Higgins. But to make matters worse, there is the House leader, Mike Johnson, was asked about this in a press conference, and he had this shitty, dumb answer.
Any comment on the tweet that Clay Higgins put out today about Haitians?
I heard about that on the floor just now as well. Clay Higgins is a dear friend of mine and a colleague from Louisiana, and a very frank and outspoken person. He's also a very principled man. And I think he tweeted, I didn't even see it, but he tweeted something today.
That's, by the way, another one of their ruses. I didn't see it. I don't even know what you're talking about, but the reporter's going to tell him. And then when she tells him, watch his reaction. It's almost like, don't tell me what it is, because now I really have to be responsible for this.
About Haitians, and he was approached by January 20th. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, look, he was approached on the floor by colleagues who said that was offensive. He went to the back. I just talked to him about it. He said he went to the back and he prayed about it and he regretted it and he pulled the post down. That's what you want a gentleman to do. I'm sure he probably regrets some of the language he used, but we move forward. We believe in redemption around here.
Oh boy. I mean, first of all, can you all you guys and gals who pray, I'm all for your prayer. I'm all for your religion. Could you do me a favor before you guys go out and say and do stupid things? Would you pray first before you do it instead of afterwards? I am sick and tired of these people saying the most vile and awful things, and then they throw somehow religion into it. And this is part of the reason why people are getting more and more away from religion. It's because of people like you, Mike Johnson. It's for people like you, Clay Higgins, who wrote a tweet that was so vile and awful that you went and prayed about it. And you know what? He actually doubled down after his little prayer. He came out and he goes, I don't really think about this thing. I don't have the tweet verbatim, but he, in this respect, he was basically like, I don't think about this. It's stuff on the bottom of my shoe. I just scrape it off and move on, is basically his response after he was called out for this awful and hideous tweet. And if you really are a religious person, you believe in Jesus and God, I am curious that if Jesus were literally sitting right next to Clay Higgins, would Clay Higgins send this tweet out? Would Mike Johnson back up Clay Higgins on this tweet if Jesus literally was sitting right next to them and say, hey, what you doing today? What you up to? What are you tweeting there? would they do this? So that tells me, are you really that serious about your religion? Do you really care about Jesus and God and what they say? Or are you using this so you can espouse your hatred? My guess is that is it's the latter more than it is the former. But as you can see, the lights flickering. That means this hurricane is getting closer and closer. Now, again, as I said, luckily, I am in a part of Florida where I'm not going to get the worst of it, but we are going to get probably 40-mile-per-hour winds. We are going to get heavy rains. It is going to be starting here very soon. I am hoping just not to lose power. That's the one thing that I really hope for, at least on this end of the hurricane. Obviously, the thing I'm really hoping for is that the damage is minimal. I don't know if that is going to be possible because before I came on, am I back? They come back. Well, actually, I think probably it is best to end the show as the hurricane, as you can see, is coming. I lost the Wi-Fi there for a minute. It looks like everybody's bailed anyway. So anyway, listen, what we'll do is we will see you guys on Tuesday night. We'll be back live with Lana. Tuesday night, we'll be back. Hopefully, I don't lose power. If I do, hopefully it's not going to be for too long of a time. But since this hurricane is on its way, and I'm probably going to lose the Wi-Fi again, I'm going to sign off for the night. Thank you, anybody, for joining us. Again, please like and subscribe to the show. We would really appreciate that. And we will see you guys next time.